I've heard enough. Get out of here!
Dad! I didn't do that!
Stop acting, Clara. We know you sold it.
That wasn't an accusation. It was a death sentence, and it was carried out right in front of the ancestral altar I once held sacred. Get out! The words sliced through the humid Charleston air, sharper than any shard of broken porcelain in our family's antique shop. Miller Sons' heritage. They came from my father, Edward, his face a mask of crimson fury I had never seen before. He stood behind the 19th century mahogany desk that had been my grandfather's, his knuckles white as he gripped its edge. Across from me, my sister, Aubrey, stood with her arms crossed, a chillingly calm look of triumph in her eyes. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with betrayal, broken only by the nervous cough of our most important client, who was frozen mid-gaze at a Georgian silver set. "You are no longer a part of this family or this business," my father continued, his voice a low, guttural promise of banishment. "Dad, I didn't do it," I whispered, my own voice a stranger to me, thin and cracking. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, pinning me to the spot. Aubrey took a deliberate step forward, her voice like ice. "Stop playing the victim, Clara. We know you sold Grandpa's journal to Blackwood. You betrayed everything he ever built. For what? A quick buck?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me, sealing my fate. "Get out, now!" As I stumbled backward, the world narrowing to a dark tunnel, a cold realization washed over me. This wasn't an argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an execution. If you've ever felt utterly alone in a room full of people who are supposed to be your family, just do me a favor and hit that like button so I know I'm not the only one who's been there. To understand that moment, you have to understand Miller Sons. It wasn't just a shop on King Street. It was a Charleston institution, a 3-generation legacy built on my great-grandfather's sharp eye for value and my grandfather Arthur's deep, abiding love for history. The air inside always smelled of lemon oil, old paper, and beeswax, a scent I once believed was the smell of home. Our family name meant something in that city. It stood for quality, history, and above all, enturity. It was a legacy my father, Edward, was obsessed with protecting, and a world where every object had a story. The problem was, in my family, so did the people. In this world, my sister Aubrey was the crown jewel. She was the one with the business degree from Duke, the dazzling smile for the society pages, the one who could charm a hesitant buyer into a 6-figure sale on a dreary Tuesday. She was the polished public face of Miller Sons, the designated heir. And me, I was the ghost in the machine. I was in the dusty workshop out back, the one with the steady hands that could piece together a shattered Meissen porcelain figure, the one with the quiet intuitions that could spot a priceless original hidden beneath layers of grime and bad paint. I had my grandfather's gift, but Aubrey had my father's unwavering attention. At dinner, he would praise her sales reports, his voice booming with pride. My mother, Helen, would just pat my hand and whisper, "Let your sister have her moment, dear. You know she needs the spotlight." I spent my life being told to be the quiet foundation upon which my sister's throne was built. I'm sitting here now at almost 10 p.m. on a Wednesday, and I wonder how many of you watching have a similar story. Were you the star of the show, or the stagehand working in the dark? Let me know in the comments if you were the Aubrey or the Clara in your family. The dismissal wasn't just a feeling. It was a series of 1,000 tiny cuts, each one leaving a scar that only I could see. I remember spending over 100 hours painstakingly restoring a battered old sea captain's chest I'd found at a dreary estate sale out in the Low Country. It was a wreck, covered in salt, damage, and grime, but I saw the intricate mother-of-pearl inlay hidden beneath. When it was finished, it was a masterpiece. I brought it into the main showroom, my heart swelling with a rare sense of pride. The very next day, I overheard Aubrey telling a wealthy couple from Atlanta the dramatic, embellished story of how she had unearthed this hidden gem and personally oversaw its delicate restoration. She sold it for $20,000. When I confronted her later, my father simply said, "A sale is a sale, Clara. Don't create drama. It benefits the family." The family, not me. Then there was the article in Southern Living magazine. They were doing a feature on legacy businesses in Charleston. The reporter asked about our most exciting recent find. Before I could even open my mouth, Aubrey launched into the story of how I'd identified a rare colonial-era painting by an overlooked female artist, retelling my discovery, my late nights at the Historical Society Library, my painstaking research, as if they were her own memories. I just sat there, smiling for the camera, feeling like a ghostwriter for my own life. The worst was when I drafted a comprehensive 30-page plan to expand our business online, focusing on smaller, accessible antiques for a younger generation. I spent weeks on it. My father glanced at the proposal for less than a minute before pushing it aside. "Leave the business strategy to your sister," he'd said, not unkindly, but with a casual finality that crushed me. "You just focus on your little projects in the back." It was a clear message. My contributions were a hobby. Hers were the future. They weren't just overlooking my talent. They were actively erasing it. The epicenter of all this simmering resentment wasn't a piece of furniture or a priceless painting. It was a simple object, a worn, leather-bound journal. It wasn't just any journal. It was my Grandpa Arthur's. Its pages were filled with his elegant, looping cursive, detailing 50 years of acquisitions, his secret restoration techniques, and the hidden histories of our most valuable pieces. It was the heart of our business, the ultimate proof of provenance for everything we sold. It was, in financial terms, the key to our entire fortune. But to me, it was something more. It was the last piece of him I had left. A few weeks before he passed from a sudden heart attack, he'd called me into his dusty study, the afternoon sun streaming through the bay windows. He pressed the heavy book into my hands, his own hands frail and spotted with age. "Your father sees the business," he'd said, his voice a soft rasp. "Aubrey sees the money. But you, Clara, you see the soul. The true inheritance isn't in the stockroom, it's in here. This belongs to the one who understands it." He looked me straight in the eye. "That's you." Aubrey knew he had given it to me. She was furious. She claimed it was a business asset that belonged in the main office safe, not my personal possession. She tried to coax it from me, then demand it. "It's not safe with you in that messy workshop," she'd argue. "You're too sentimental. You don't understand its actual monetary value." What she never understood was that I was the only one who did. I understood its value beyond dollars and cents. It was a testament, a legacy, and a promise from the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I wasn't invisible. Think for a moment about the one person in your life, past or present, who made you feel completely, unconditionally seen. If you have a person like my Grandpa Arthur, I just want you to take a second and type, I remember in the comments below. It feels right to honor them right here with all of us. The final act of my old life played out on a sweltering July afternoon. A renowned collector from New York, a man named Mr. Davenport, had flown in on his private jet specifically to view a Revolutionary War-era desk we owned. It was a piece rumored to have been used by a signer of the Declaration of Independence, potentially worth over $1 million, but only if we could prove its lineage. And the only definitive proof was a specific entry in Grandpa Arthur's journal. I went to my workshop to retrieve it from the small, fireproof safe I kept hidden under my main workbench. My hands felt clammy as I spun the familiar combination. I swung the heavy door open. It was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my throat. I tore my workshop apart, drawers pulled out, canvases thrown aside, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was gone. I ran into the main showroom, my face pale, my voice barely a whisper. "The journal," I stammered, looking at my father. It's gone." Before he could even process my words, Aubrey stepped forward from beside the fireplace, holding her phone. Her face was a perfect mask of grave, reluctant disappointment. "Father," she said, her voice catching with theatrical sorrow. "I didn't want to believe it, but I found these." She showed him her screen. It was an email chain, seemingly between my personal email address and our biggest rival, Jonathan Blackwood. The emails detailed a sickening negotiation, a price, a plan to hand over scans of the journal's most critical pages for a sum of $50,000. They were fake, of course, expertly forged. But in that moment of pure panic, they looked horrifyingly real. "She wasn't just going to steal it," Aubrey whispered, twisting the knife with devastating precision. "She was going to sell our family's soul." That's when my father's face changed from confusion to that mask of crimson fury. That's when he stopped being my father and became my judge, jury, and executioner. I walked out of Miller Sons that day and didn't look back. I couldn't. I left with nothing but my purse, my phone, and a gaping hole in my chest where my family used to be. The oppressive heat of the Charleston summer felt like it was suffocating me. The first 2 nights were a blur spent in a cheap motel off I-26 that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and despair. I just lay on the scratchy synthetic bedspread, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying my father's face, my sister's smirk over and over. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. On the 3rd day, my savings dwindling, I swallowed my pride and called my old college roommate, Maya. She was a nurse who worked night shifts at the medical university. She didn't ask for details I wasn't ready to give. She just said, "I have a spare key under the ceramic frog on my porch. The couch is yours for as long as you need it." Her small, colorful, single house in the Wagoner Terrace neighborhood became my sanctuary. I started looking for any work I could find, waiting tables, stocking shelves at a tourist shop on Market Street, anything to pay for groceries. The shame was a constant weight. The city felt suffocatingly small, and I imagined everyone was whispering about the disgraced Miller daughter. About a month into my new shattered life, the impossible happened. I got a call from an unknown number. It was Jonathan Blackwood, the rival, the very man I was accused of conspiring with. I almost hung up. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I'm aware of the rumors circulating. I assure you, I have no interest in them. However, I was at the Sotheby's auction last spring, and I bid on a small Swiss music box. I lost, but I never forgot the restoration work. It was flawless. He paused. I was told that was your work. My lead restorer just retired. I have an opening in my workshop. It's not glamorous, but it's a start. It was the most bitter, beautiful irony I could have ever imagined. The man my family had used as a weapon to destroy me was the only person in the entire city offering me a chance to rebuild. Accepting a job from Jonathan Blackwood felt like a quiet act of rebellion. My first day in his workshop, located in a restored brick warehouse in the city's old industrial district, was humbling. It was smaller than the one I'd had at Miller Sons, but it was clean, organized, and blessedly free of ghosts. For the first few months, I kept my head down and just worked. I repaired chipped porcelain, recaned chairs with practiced precision, and meticulously cleaned decades of tarnish from forgotten silver. I poured all the grief, the silent rage, and the sting of betrayal into my hands, and somehow it transformed into a laser-like focus. Slowly, things started to shift. The other artisans in the shop, initially wary of the Miller girl, started coming to my bench for advice on difficult repairs. Mr. Blackwood began assigning me more complex and valuable pieces, testing my limits, and watching me exceed them every time. There was no family drama, no favoritism, no one stealing my credit. My work simply spoke for itself, and for the first time in my life, it was heard. After a year, with Mr. Blackwood's blessing, I started taking on small freelance projects on the weekends. A friend of a friend needed a family heirloom restored. A small gallery on Broad Street needed a collection appraised for insurance. Word began to spread, not about the disgraced daughter, but about Clara, the gifted restorer with an uncanny eye for detail and a fierce commitment to integrity. I built a simple website, started an Instagram account to showcase the before and after transformations, and piece by piece, I forged a new identity. I wasn't a shadow anymore. I was a creator, a business owner, a name people sought out for my skill, not my lineage. I was thriving, not just in spite of my family, but in the very place they would have considered enemy territory. Maybe you're at a point in your life right now where you've had to start over from absolute zero. If you've ever found strength in an unexpected place or from an unlikely person, I'd be so honored if you shared a little piece of that experience in the comments. Your story might be the very thing someone else, scrolling through videos late at night, needs to read to keep going. 5 years passed. 5 years of humid Charleston summers. 5 years of Christmases without the scent of my mother's pecan pie. 5 years of birthdays marked only by a quiet dinner with Maya. I had built a life for myself, a good one, filled with work I loved, friends who valued me, and a small, sunny apartment in a historic building that was entirely my own. The pain of my family's betrayal had dulled from a constant, screaming agony to a low, chronic ache I had learned to live with. I rarely thought about Miller Sons, but through the small-town grapevine of the antiques world, I heard whispers. Business was down. Their reputation for authenticity had taken a hit after a couple of high-profile misattributions. Without my grandfather's journal, and without my eye, their foundation of integrity had begun to crack. Aubrey's superficial charm, it turned out, could only carry them so far when faced with true connoisseurs. The revelation came not with a bang, but with the groan of old iron. My father, in a desperate bid to revitalize the failing business, had decided to renovate my old workshop, turning it into a new modern showroom. He hired a crew as two workers strained to move a massive 19th century iron filing cabinet that had sat against the back wall for as long as I could remember, something fell out from behind it with a soft thud onto the dusty floorboards. It was a leather-bound book, Grandpa Arthur's journal. It must have slipped into the narrow 3-inch gap between the back of the cabinet and the wall, a dark space obscured by shadows. It hadn't been stolen. It had fallen. And the impossibly heavy cabinet, which I then vaguely recalled Aubrey insisting they move to that exact spot for better organization the week I officially inherited the journal, had hidden it perfectly for 5 long years. The physical proof of my innocence had been sitting there the entire time, waiting for the light. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon while I was carefully applying gold leaf to a fractured mirror frame, the late sun casting long shadows across my workshop floor. The caller ID flashed a name I hadn't seen in 5 years, Edward Miller. A rock settled in the pit of my stomach. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a notification for a new message popped up. I wiped my hands, took a deep breath, and pressed play, my own hand unsteady. My father's voice filled the quiet workshop, but it was a voice I barely recognized. It was slower, stripped of its usual booming authority, and strained with a weariness that felt ancient. "Clara," he began, It's Dad. We found the journal. It was behind the old iron cabinet. It must have fallen." He took a shaky breath, and for a second I thought I heard a sob. "I was wrong, Clara. About everything. I was so wrong." For a moment I felt nothing, just a strange ringing silence in my ears. Then a cold, bitter wave washed over me. He was wrong. That was it. 5 years of birthdays missed, 5 years of me rebuilding my life from the absolute rubble he'd left behind, and it all came down to that simple, insufficient phrase. He continued, and his next words revealed his true motive, stripping away any illusion of remorse I might have had. "The business isn't doing well," he admitted, his voice cracking with self-pity. "It needs you. Your eye. Your hands. We need you to come home, Clara. Please." And that's when the hollowness turned to a quiet, burning rage. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about the nights I cried myself to sleep on Maya's couch or the holidays I spent alone. It was about the shop. It was about his legacy. He wasn't asking for his daughter back. He was trying to rehire his most valuable, unpaid employee. I wonder if anyone listening has ever received an apology that felt more about the other person's needs than your pain. If you've ever been in that position where you had to decide if a sorry was real or just convenient, choose a side in the comments. Type "forgive" if you think all apologies deserve a chance, or forget if some wounds are just too deep to be closed so easily. I agreed to meet them a week later on a Sunday afternoon. Walking back through the ornate iron-wrought gates of Miller Sons felt like stepping into a photograph from a past life. The air still held the faint scent of lemon oil, but it was stale, and a fine layer of dust coated some of the furniture near the back. The vibrant, living history I remembered had been replaced by a stagnant silence, the quiet of a museum after closing hours. They were all there, waiting for me at the large mahogany table in the back office, my father looking a decade older, his shoulders slumped, my mother twisting a silk napkin in her hands, her eyes red-rimmed, and Aubrey staring at the floor, stripped of her usual arrogant veneer. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the defendant in their courtroom. I was a visitor from another world. My father began with a rambling, disjointed apology about the pressure he was under. My mother just whispered about how much they missed me, how the house felt empty. Then it was Aubrey's turn. I was just so jealous, she said, tears finally brimming in her eyes. Grandpa Arthur, he always saw you. He talked to you differently. It was like I was invisible. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, and I almost laughed at the breathtaking hypocrisy. Invisible? I replied, my voice even and steady, holding no tremor of my past self. Aubrey, you were the sun that everything in this family revolved around. I was the one who didn't exist unless you needed a shadow to make yourself look brighter. I then turned my gaze to my father. And you, I said, my voice not rising but cutting through the silence like glass. You talk about legacy and heritage. The real legacy Grandpa left wasn't in that journal. It was in integrity, in truth, in family. And you burned it to the ground that day to protect your own pride. I stood up. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to believe the absolute worst of me without a shred of doubt, and that is something a simple sorry cannot fix. I turned and walked away from the table, my footsteps echoing on the old heart pine floors that Grandpa Arthur and I used to polish together on Saturday mornings. I thought it was over. But as I reached the grand entryway, the little brass bell above the door still and silent, I heard my mother's soft footsteps behind me. "Clara, wait!" she pleaded, her hand tentatively touching my arm. I stopped, but didn't turn around right away. "Please," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Your father, he has a temper. He was so angry, so afraid of losing everything. He wasn't himself that day. Can't you forgive him? Can't you forgive us? I miss my family. I just want my daughter back." That's when I finally turned to face her. I looked at my mother, at her watery, pleading eyes and her trembling hands, and for the first time, I didn't see a victim of my father's rage. I saw his co-conspirator. "I don't blame Dad for being the storm, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding, a stark contrast to the years I had spent swallowing my words. Storms happen. They're loud and destructive. I blame you for not being the anchor. I blame you for never, ever being the shelter. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of the gentle matriarch shattering. "You stood there," I continued, "in the kitchen, telling me to let Aubrey have her moments. You sat at that table and you looked down at your plate while he shattered my world. You chose the illusion of peace over your own child, every single time. His words were the wound, but your silence. Your silence was the poison that kept it from ever healing. So no, I don't miss the family we were, because it was never truly a family for me." I looked at her one last time, seeing the full depth of the tragedy. She wasn't just my father's wife. She was the silent architect of my loneliness. Then, I opened the heavy oak door and walked out into the late afternoon sun, leaving her alone with the truth she had avoided for a lifetime. Driving away from Miller Sons for the last time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. The heavy, 100-pound weight of waiting for an apology, of hoping they would one day see the truth, was finally gone. It was lifted from my shoulders not by their words, but by my own. I had closed the book on that chapter of my life myself. My studio, now located in a bright, airy loft overlooking the harbor, is my sanctuary. It's filled with sunlight, the smell of wood polish and old books, and the silent stories of the beautiful broken things I have the honor of healing. I am surrounded not by a legacy of wealth or status, but by the fruits of my own labor and the respect of my peers. In that moment of clarity, I realized the true inheritance Grandpa Arthur gave me wasn't that leather-bound journal. It was the skill in my hands, the passion in my heart, and the unwavering belief that an object's and a person's true worth lies not in its price tag, but in its story and its soul. And that's the lesson I wanted to share with you all tonight, Wednesday, July 16th, wherever you are in the world. People will try to define you. They will hand you a label, the quiet one, the difficult one, the one who isn't good enough. They will try to put you in a box that makes them feel comfortable. You do not have to accept it. Your value is not determined by the family you were born into or the people who fail to see you. You determine your own value. You build your own legacy with every choice you make, every time you stand up for your own truth. What I lost in that grand house on King Street, I found in myself. And that is a kind of home no one can ever take from you again. My story had a painful chapter, but I learned that I am the author of my own book, and so are you. If you believe in the power of writing your own ending and choosing your own worth, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Let's build a community of people who aren't defined by their pasts, but by the futures they are creating for themselves, one day at a time. Thank you for being here with me tonight.